After an offseason that proved to be red hot with drama, Formula One returns to the red hot desert of Bahrain for preseason testing. In this episode of F1 Brake Check, Corey and I will discuss the news from preseason testing and preview the opening Grand Prix of 2024 in Bahrain. Corey will scramble my brain with his Stump the Pundit trivia question, and we'll talk about the history of preseason testing and the changes that have evolved over the years. All this and more on this week's episode of F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, welcome back to F1 Brake Check. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, my intrepid co-host, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing today, sir?
Much better. Yeah,
Good.
I'm not suffering from jet lag anymore. Cigar, which was a little bit more on the expensive side of life, but it was very good. We had our meetup on Friday. By the end of that night, I was beat.
I could tell you were
able to walk around.
Yeah, I could tell it was definitely time for you to get on the road and get home before it got too much later, because otherwise it would have been unsafe for you to be out and about.
Exactly. So how about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We're back with season 2 of F1 Brake Check. This is our first episode of season 2, and it's super exciting that we've just wrapped up preseason testing and we have the first Grand Prix of the season this weekend. All right, so first up, let's dive into preseason testing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So Corey, first of all, what were your initial impressions of preseason testing so far?
I'm thinking of Alonso's quote, "There's 19 drivers who know they're not going to win the championship."
Yeah, that could be a little disheartening.
Leave it to Alonso, dude. Not mince words. So Red Bull, they weren't the fastest. They were the fastest at some points, but they weren't really the fastest throughout the weekend. And I attribute that not to the true performance of the car, but because the engineers had enough information, or they were trying different configurations. It wasn't an all-out, let's go as fast as we can and try to beat it. It was not that at all. That's one of the things I enjoy about preseason, is being able really to understand the technology behind F1 and not really look at all the strategies and who's going fast and who's going slow and everything like that. But that being said, I don't think that Haas and Williams and Alpine are in that sandbagging category, unfortunately.
No.
That they have some struggles on this upcoming season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some reliability problems with the Williams that limited their running. We saw some different issues, but we saw reliability issues with Haas as well. As we've seen in years past, a lot of times during testing, we would see teams that would actually run the cars super, super light, oftentimes even underweight, in order to go out and set a blistering fast time, chasing sponsorships or chasing headlines. Always with testing, you can never really measure what a car's true performance is like from preseason testing. Like you said, Max was the fastest on day 1, but Ferrari were fastest with Leclerc on day 2 and 3. But you have to wonder, like you said, with Red Bull, are they already so confident and so far ahead in their development of the car? Were they actually running more race type setups and things like that? Were they working more towards making sure the car was optimized for the race this weekend? And I think it was Leclerc or Sainz at one point had the fastest lap, but it's because they had the C4 tire on there. So they were one of the few teams to go out and actually set a really, really fast pace, but it did so on the C4 tire. Again, it is so hard to know what the team's plan of attack is at any given point during testing to really be able to gauge who's going to be where come free practice this week for the Grand Prix. I think we're going to get a much better idea of where things stand by this time tomorrow. We'll have already had both FP1 and FP2, and we'll have a much better idea of how the cars are going to perform.
Not only the performance of Red Bull, but the tire deg on Red Bull, it's non-existent. The rest of the field, I think, are going to suffer from how well not only does the car perform, but how well it actually treats those tires as well. So with all those things considered, it's going to be, I'm hoping for a much more challenging year than, obviously last year. Lewis is fantastic at sandbagging. Every single time
Yes.
he'll
Yeah.
say, "Oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. The sky is falling." And you believe him, right? And then come race day, you're like, "But I thought you had problems." And
Exactly. Yes.
he is
Yeah.
the
Lewis
master
is
at that.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Lewis is one of the kings of doing that.
Yeah.
Another driver that used to be really good at that was Alain Prost. He was phenomenal at sandbagging. When it comes to that, they are in a class all by themselves.
Yeah, I hope for Lewis's sake that it's his last year with Mercedes, he's not going to have the issues that he had in the previous 3 years. Hopefully he can be up there on the grid, and hopefully he can actually be up on more podiums this year before he heads off to Ferrari.
All right, so let's talk about the bad. Like we've already touched on, that Williams and Haas had some reliability issues that limited their running. And then also we saw in the span of less than 100 days, we have already seen 2 drain covers cause issues with coming loose and causing damage to cars. And now we've seen it during testing with Leclerc, him get caught out because the drain cover came loose and then broke in half. So so for some reason, Ferrari seems to be a magnet for for these drain covers.
Yeah, somehow they know exactly where they are.
Yes, absolutely. But I did see a news article today, though, that said that the track organizers do believe that they've got it resolved and there should be no more issues with these drain covers. So it shouldn't be an issue for the weekend coming up. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of other bad things. Albon had one off-track incident. I'm trying to think. I thought there was one more, but it's escaping me at the moment.
Oh, we know who that is. Come on.
That's right. Yes.
I love you. I love you. Truly, I wish the best for Logan Sargent. But good Lord.
Yes. Yeah.
Listen, Williams, I am available. I will be your second driver. I will guarantee you, I will always come in 20th. Always. But I will not wreck.
Yes.
The offer is yours.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, I'm all for it. I'd love to see you in that seat. All right. So I guess, with that, we'll have to talk about the ugly, which you just touched upon. It was Logan Sargent. There was even a really good article that Logan was featured in that talked about how all the changes that he made to his training regimen to try to make him a better F1 driver. After seeing, what we saw in testing and everything, I hope that this was just a combination of bad luck, bad timing.
I truly wish the best for him. I really hope that he has a long life in F1, that he's able to turn things around. But so far, man, it's hard to see.
Yep. All right, on to our next topic. Drive to Survive dropped on Netflix. Unfortunately, because my schedule has been absolutely insane, I have not had a chance to watch any of it. My plan is that to binge watch the whole thing tomorrow. Have you gotten a chance to watch any of it, Corey? And if so, your first impressions?
Yeah, I've watched some of it. It's so far, at least, I haven't seen the drama that they are so well known for. Again, just so far, I've only been into, I think, the 3rd episode, maybe the 4th episode, something like that. They go through the Vries and the backstory behind that. And, honestly, I forgot that he was even in F1 for the, I was like, oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. That's how we got Danny Rick back on the grid.
Yeah. It's funny. I forgot about him because, Danny Rick is now, obviously in his place, but I forgot that he was in F1 for 9 or 10 races. I thought he was pulled much sooner than that, but Danny's first race was Silverstone. So just one of those things that you don't remember because it's been, almost a year now, right? The other one that I found really interesting was the one where they're talking through Alpine and the decision to bring Gasly on with Ocon, knowing how much those two really don't like one another. So And Ocon, he does not care if you're on his team or not. His elbows are out. Does not
Oh
matter.
yeah.
And I kind of respect that. I don't care who you are. I'm going for it. And if I'm going to remain
Yep.
in F1, I have to. It's been good so far. And like I
Yeah.
said, there's not a whole lot of drama at this point.
And we had lamented last year. We had really hoped that that was going to be the case, that they would go back to more like what they did the first few seasons, where it was more about just a behind the scenes look and not trying to manufacture like a reality show.
So on to Bahrain, the preview.
Yep. As we mentioned just a little bit ago, looking at our countdown clock, we have 12 hours and 25 minutes until the cars fire for the first time for the 2024 season in Bahrain. Just as a quick preview, let's talk about what we expect to see this weekend. So I'll let you go ahead and start, sir.
I certainly expect Red Bull to be up at the very top. I expect them to have pole position. I want to say that the ghosts that have been plaguing Checo are gone. I would love to see him next to Max, or fingers crossed in front of Max. Obviously, I love McLaren. I really would like to see them challenging Red Bull, if not beating Red Bull. I just don't know how feasible that is. I'm really hoping for that. And then Mercedes probably pulling up fourth or fifth. I would imagine somewhere in that slot. And then the very bottom, I would definitely see Haas. One of the things that I would like to see, or that I'm somewhat hopeful on, is that through preseason testing that Williams have pinpointed on what the problems are, and actually see exactly what's happening and be able to fix or remedy some of those issues that they faced through preseason. So I would hope to see them in the points. Maybe not fifth or sixth, but maybe 10th and 9th, something like that.
Yeah.
I would really like to see that. And that's at least my expectation as well. What about you, Scott?
I think you're pretty spot on that. I think we're definitely going to see Red Bull probably topping the timesheets probably throughout the weekend. Checo, his preseason testing went really well. He didn't have any issues or anything like that. His times were very comparable to what Max was running, because one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that with preseason testing, the teams are only allowed to run one car at a time. They had Max running all day Wednesday. They had Checo running all day Thursday, and then Max ran in the morning on Friday and Checo ran in the afternoon on Friday. Whereas most of the other teams would flip flop the drivers on all 3 days. So, like with McLaren, they had Oscar and Lando would flip flop. But the whole point that I was trying to make, though, is that on Thursday, Checo had some really, really good runs. I mean, some really, really top notch, very competitive runs. So I definitely think that Red Bull, both the Red Bulls, should be very much at the top end of the timesheets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Throughout the weekend. Now, one of the things is that I think that McLaren didn't show everything that they had. I'm not going to say that they were sandbagging in the true sense,
right?
Because they were very upbeat when they were talking with the media and everything. They weren't saying, "Hey, we had problems" or anything. But I think that they have more in the car than what they were showing. Like I just said, that they weren't sandbagging, but they definitely didn't show their full potential during the preseason testing.
Just like Red Bull.
I think I think they will definitely be up there on the timesheets. And then after that, Ferrari looked really, really strong during preseason testing. So we'll see if that translates into actual race pace this weekend. As traditionally happens with the first race of the season, is for one thing, because the cars are all brand new and because of the limits on preseason testing, you're going to see something weird happen. We'll probably see a few surprises in qualifying, where drivers wind up for the first qualifying of the season, because we're going to see which drivers are able to nail the setup for qualifying. They're going to wind up in places on the grid that they normally wouldn't be and probably won't be later on in the season. Definitely think we'll see some surprises for the race, but they're not going to be harbingers of what is to come for the season. I'm like you, though. I'm super excited. It's been a very long 97 days, and I am ready for the action.
Same here.
All right, so let's move on to Stump the Pundit for our listeners out there, because I am a longtime Formula One fan and because I'm a student of the sport and its history and everything. And so this is something we do to have a little fun where Corey will come up with a trivia question to test my knowledge of Formula One. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
Okay, so still staying in the subject of drivers, I thought it'd be kind of funny to see how well you knew drivers from a professional standpoint. So I took two drivers that are currently on the grid, and I'll give you some facts about them and see if you can guess who they are.
Okay.
So the first one started out at Toro Rosso, Renault, Ferrari, and McLaren. He has one race win. He has 2 pole positions. He's raced in 166 total Grand Prix and has 15 podiums. But the difference here is he's also raced in Le Mans.
You said he had how many wins?
He's had 1 race win.
1 race win. So that would be Mr. Ocon. No.
One more try. One more try.
I was going to say it was.
Remember, he's also raced in Le Mans.
Okay, so I'm racking my brain to remember who on the current grid has run at Le Mans. So the only other one I can think of, and he said that he spent time at McLaren, Ferrari, Toro Rosso. So it had to be Sainz.
That's it. Yeah. Nice one. Nice one. Okay, so the second one, he started at Williams in 2013. He's driven for multiple F1 teams. He has 10 race wins, 67 podiums, and 20 pole positions.
That would be Mr. Valtteri Bottas.
Nice. You know your drivers, sir.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yep. All right. So now we're going to talk about Formula One testing, preseason, in-season testing, and more. In the beginning, the Lords of F1, aka the FIA, created a new racing series that would be the pinnacle of motorsport and engineering. There were few rules in the early days governing the cars and how the teams operated. In the first 2 decades of F1, the teams would regularly run the cars outside of Grand Prix to, quote unquote, test the car's capabilities and to see where improvements could be made to cars and the driver's abilities. The tools used for testing were very limited, and oftentimes the sole tool was the driver's backside. In the first few years, testing primarily centered around getting prepared for the season by allowing the drivers to familiarize themselves with the cars, and for the new drivers, the team itself. Oftentimes, the only in-season testing would consist of testing of a new driver after a fellow driver was incapable of continuing to drive for the season due to injury or worse, death. Additionally, when teams would introduce a new car or a significant upgrade to the car, the teams would hold an in-season test to gather information on the changes and how the drivers would respond. Additionally, as the teams were just beginning to understand aerodynamics, the tools used for testing aero changes either didn't exist or were extremely primitive. As the years of technology marched on into the 70s, preseason and in-season testing became much more frequent. The teams were able to start using primitive sensors that would test various parameters in the car for the engineers and the mechanics to study. Additionally, aerodynamic testing was accomplished by taping string all over the car and then observing how the string would move while the car was in motion. As the 80s and 90s progressed, computerized telemetry and wind tunnels became the norm in Formula One, but a premium was still placed on testing by the teams. There would oftentimes be both closed and shared testing at various circuits leading up to the season and between races. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the teams were testing so much that the larger, more well-backed teams would have dedicated teams of mechanics who would run the reserve/development driver constantly throughout the year. It got to the point where famously, Michael Schumacher, during his time with Ferrari, when the proximity of a race was close enough, would oftentimes go back to Italy and run the Ferrari around the Fiorina test track to help optimize the car for a race weekend. Around 2009, in an effort to address the rising costs of F1, the FIA placed new rules around the team's ability to test their cars. Under the new rules, a single preseason test would be held, which would be the only location and time that teams would be allowed to test their cars. The FIA also instituted one in-season test and one postseason test. Pirelli was believed to have been a large reason why the rule changes were made, as it allowed them to contain costs and not have to arrive at multiple tests with multiple sets of tires. One of the concessions that was made to the teams was that they were allowed to have an independent quote unquote filming day where they were allowed to run the car on Pirelli control tires for a maximum of 100 kilometers. These would often constitute the quote unquote shakedown of the new car after its initial launch, which is what we saw this year with most of the teams running at their home tracks, either Silverstone or Fiorina, shortly after they launched their cars. Additionally, the teams can run any car 2 years or more older, presumably to allow the test/reserve drivers an opportunity to taste a Formula One car for real. However, the cars are only allowed to run with the same Pirelli control tires, and they cannot run any parts that were produced after the date of the last Grand Prix for the season the car was competed in. With the institution of the cost cap, a number of team principals have expressed the desire for the testing regulations to be revised to allow private testing in lieu of spending the money elsewhere. Time will tell if these proposals gain any traction that will allow, at least in a small measure, the return of open testing in the future. Corey, your thoughts on preseason testing, where we're at now, and what you think should happen with testing going forward?
I'm a big fan of the open testing. Fan perspective. I think that the more testing that you can have will allow for better racing during the season. So limiting that is obviously going to limit the amount of technology and the amount of testing that goes through it. We're both in software. So in software, you think of any application out there, it takes time for you to develop that piece of software. It also takes as much time to test that software, retest it, make sure it performs correctly, all that stuff. Same thing with these F1 cars is that you have to go through testing, understand what happens when the wind changes, what happens when this happens, what happens when you hit a bump, all these different factors. And when you limit that, you're just limiting the true potential of a car. I would much prefer us to go back to the open style testing versus what we're having today. I understand why we have it, but again, like you pointed out, there's a budget cap that protects those that are smaller in budget. So we have those protections in place now. There's no reason that I've heard or seen why we wouldn't open this up again. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Zach Brown floated that towards the end of last season, and I am completely on board with it because I do miss the more open rules on testing. Now, I understand even with the budget cap, there probably still needs to be some parameters around it. Pirelli had some hand in the testing limitations just simply because their costs were spiraling out of control because having to show up with multiple teams of their engineers at different tracks at a given time with tires and everything and all of the support personnel to like mount the tires and everything else. I kind of understand they'll still need some in order not to stretch Pirelli so thin.
Sure.
They'll still need some regulations around that. But I definitely think that in this day and age of a cost cap, the limitations on testing is no longer needed. Just like the teams have a limit on the amount of time that's allowed to use their wind tunnels, and it's based on a sliding scale based upon your finishing position in the previous year's constructors champion. Spend the money where they want to spend it. With the exception of testing in the wind tunnel, they can spend their money however they like. There's no other provisions in the regulations that says how the teams are supposed to spend their money. So by all means, get rid of the testing limitations. You're right that there is no substitute for running the cars on track. Now, the simulations, both the computerized simulations of changes that they can make to the cars and the actual simulators that the drivers run back at the factories, they're really good. compared to where they were at 10, 12 years ago. They're light years beyond what they used to be, but they're still simulations. They're still not the real thing. And there are still things that happen in the real world that you just can't always simulate. You can come up with literally millions of data points of simulation, but there's going to still be one little weird thing. No matter how good the simulations get, they're never going to be able to perfectly replicate real world scenarios. Live real world testing comes into play. And I think that, for the sport, I think that it would be a definite advantage for the sport and for the racing itself to open up the testing regulations more than what we have right now.
I completely agree.
All right, then. So I'm talked out. How about you?
Yeah, man, I think we're good.
All right, then. Let's close this bad boy out. Well, petrol heads, that wraps up another episode of F1 Brake Check. Join us next week when we break down all the action from the 2024 season opening Grand Prix at Bahrain. We'll cover the latest news. We'll have a technical discussion of how an F1 car is set up and the time and effort required to extract maximum performance from the car. So until then, he is Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go.
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. We value your feedback and passion, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, stay inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.